This is a question from Ed Farrar, who wants to know how you would solve the disagreements between the various doctors' unions and the government. So I suppose that you could expand that to say, is it possible to continue funding, or is it possible to start funding the NHS in a way that will enable it to not disintegrate?
Okay, now you're getting a hint of the problem of being a politician. The things like mastermind here, I'm like boats, houses, nature, doctors. So I'm going to say I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know enough about it
You're not allowed to say
understand.
You don't know.
I don't know. I really don't know. And all I can tell you is that if I were a politician working on this issue, it's really, really important to spend a few days talking to people who know what they're talking about before I give an answer to you.
Okay. I know my daughter is in the audience, and she's just begun work as a civil servant, so I'm going to ask a question from Matt, who is a former civil servant, and he asks, what advice would you give to current civil servants facing consistent backlash from the current government? But I think what's interesting in that is that in your book, civil servants are often cast as people who regard ministers basically as inconveniences to be passed along like parcels. Yeah.
So there's a line that Michael Gove produces where he says that ministers are often treated like child emperors. In other words, they're like some sort of amazing 5-year-old robed in imperial yellow saying, "Invade Mongolia." And the civil servants are all like, "Yes, Emperor, we're going to invade Mongolia." That's right. And of course, the problem is that you create a very, very bad relationship between civil servants and politicians over time. Civil servants are aware that the politicians are reshuffled insanely quickly. Grant Shapps has had 5 cabinet jobs in a year, right? And I mean, you know, just take on what that means. I mean, the guy has been made defense secretary. Presumably, he does not know the difference between a harpoon and a typhoon. And that's inevitable, right? Because he's had 4 different jobs in a year. So the civil servants see ministers who are reshuffled very quickly. The ministers then try to assert themselves. The civil servants, understandably worried about these frequent reshuffles, worried about information, worried about stability of politics, often are putting on the brake. The ministers then get very aggressive and start bullying. I found myself pulled into cycles of this in government. I had some very, very sad interactions, which I regret to this day with civil servants, precisely because of this, because they're looking at me and thinking, this is a minister who may be here for a matter of weeks, who's asking me to do something very radical, and I'm going to do my best to slow roll it, and I'm saying, I'm going to be here for a few weeks, I'm determined to change the world. And this is a very, very bad dynamic. And I think it's one of the other things that we need to change. If we had longer, we should talk about the way that we need to change the way that ministers work in order, partly, to improve the way the civil service works.
I presume you've seen Yes, Minister?
I have, yes.
And the thick of it?
Yes.
So which of the two do you think is more accurate as a portrayal of the relationship between government and civil service?
I think the problem with Yes, Minister, I don't know, how many people in this audience have seen Yes, Minister? Yeah, most of the audience, I guess. Yeah, maybe aged people like me and Tom. I mean, for those of you who remember Yes, Minister, Sir Humphrey is a sort of, he's like Mephistopheles. He's like this incredibly cunning man with a very, very, very clear plan. And the minister is simply pushed aside as Sir Humphrey pursues his cunning agenda. That isn't quite right. I didn't often feel that I was dealing with people who had a very, very clear plan of their own that they were trying to push for, and they were pushing me aside. I felt more that we were dealing with a situation where people felt, civil servants often felt, very short of money, short of leadership, uncertain where they were going, trying to keep their head above water. I didn't feel that I was being sort of manipulated by a Sir Humphrey.
Okay, one last question on issues of policy. This is, again, from Anonymous. I expect it may be from N. Sturgeon, perhaps, or H. Yusuf. Do you think that Scotland will still be in the United Kingdom in 10 years' time?
I very, 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 very much hope so. But I think you shouldn't underestimate the risks. We live in an age, and this is what the age of populism is about. It really is an age in which it is very easy to mount an argument where you say, I am standing up for the people, I'm standing up for the nation against the elite. And you put the elite in Brussels, or in the case of Scottish nationalists, you put the elite in Westminster. And it's remarkable how you can get those movements going and whipping it up. We saw it with the Brexit referendum. I think the Scottish independence referendum happened quite early in this change in the way that politics works. I know that the polls at the moment suggest that Scotland would remain. But remember, the polls suggested that Britain would vote Remain not very long before the Brexit referendum outcome. Remember that Theresa May thought she was going to win a 200-seat majority when she called the election in 2017 and lost her majority entirely. Things can flip in 6 weeks. We live in a world of very, very rapid, radical change. But probably the area of the United Kingdom that I'm more worried about is Northern Ireland. And I think it's a very strange, maybe I need to appeal to Tom's historian hat. It is very strange how little people in Great Britain think about Northern Ireland. It's a part of our country. It is the most tense politics. It's the most intense experience in our whole country. And yet I often felt in Westminster as though we treated it as though it was Serbia or something.
Not entirely removed from that, your last comments. Moving on to the future of geopolitics. This is the big one. This is from Julien, who actually he asked you a question about how you viewed Macron, and you kind of answered that. So Julien's earlier question was spiked, but this is an excellent question, and I'm sure lots of people want to hear your answer on it. Is the UK ever going to rejoin the EU? Not do you want it to, but is it?
I think the most likely way of the UK rejoining the EU is if the EU forms itself into an inner circle and an outer circle. You could imagine an outer circle of countries that wanted to be part of the European Union but did not want to be part of an ever closer political union forming, and the United Kingdom joining that group. Now, what is that group? We still have to see it. Probably some Northern European countries, some of the Scandinavian countries. But the best hope of getting there is to move quickly towards returning to a customs union. I mean, the maddest thing of all was leaving the customs union. It's devastating. You can see this. The ONS, the Office of National Statistics, has just done this incredible, you may have seen it today, it's completely recalculated our GDP figures. Right? Given the GDP figures are central to the whole of politics, we've suddenly gone from being bottom of the G7 to the middle of the ranks of the G7 in one day, because they've just counted it again.
Well, that's Liz Truss-style growth, isn't it?
That's it, yeah. But one of the things that you can see in the figures is that actually manufacturing and agriculture has suffered very, very disproportionately badly over the last 2 years, and will suffer much more when the full implications of things like the Australian trade deal come through. I think we should return to the customs union. I think Europe is not just a natural economic partner, particularly at a time when we're worried about China and Russia, when the world is becoming more unstable. It's also a vital, vital political partner for the United Kingdom.
Okay, and the other... the other, I suppose, huge geopolitical issue facing Europe, this is anonymous, what do you see the end game being in Ukraine?
I don't currently see an end game in Ukraine, sadly. I think it feels to me like the Iran-Iraq war. It feels to me like something that could drag on for 8 years. In fact, it has some of the features of the Iran-Iraq war. Iran, like Russia, had the population. Iraq, like Ukraine, had the high-tech backing and the weapons coming in, support from the United States. it feels to me as though breaking through that Russian front line is going to be very, very difficult. It's a deep, very well-established line now. And the Ukrainians have been trying to run a counteroffensive really from the beginning of the spring. They may have some breakthroughs, but even if they do, right, even if they retake large bits of the Donbass, the question is, what does Russia then do? Russia's not going away. And Putin is not an outlier in Russia. In many ways, the biggest threat to Putin is not from a liberal left, it's from a more nationalist right. There's a depth of popular support for a Russian nationalist position on Ukraine. And I find it very, very difficult to imagine this thing ending through military means.
Okay, well, I think following that, we've got to turn to Josh M's question. Are there any positives about politics right now, or is it all awful?
I mean, the weird thing is that there are a lot of positives. I mean, I work in very poor countries in Africa, and I've been living in Jordan, and I've been writing a book, and it's a pretty gloomy book about British politics, and I sort of got myself in a headspace of thinking the whole thing had gone to hell in a handbasket. And then I spent this morning walking through London in blazing sunshine, and I felt quite cheerful. Now, it's a bit of a mystery to me. I think there's one of two possibilities. One of them is that our governments are not quite as unbelievably awful as we believe, or maybe government doesn't matter that much. Maybe, in fact, in many ways, our society isn't as dependent on members of parliament as members of parliament want to believe, and that there are actually 70 million people getting on with their lives, organizing things, and in mysterious ways that we can't really understand, London often remains very vibrant and vigorous. What are the problems in our society? Deep. The most difficult problem in our society, I think, is extreme poverty. And not just extreme poverty of families, which we talk about a lot, but extreme poverty amongst the poor elderly. Social care in this country is a disgrace. And look, it's horrible being poor and young, and because we're always appealing to young voters, we talk about young people all the time. We don't talk about what it's like to be poor and 88 years old and looking after a 90-year-old doubly incontinent husband with a care worker visiting you 15 minutes a day, and not with a prospect of being fit and healthy and a future for you, but a decline. And nothing, I think, is more shameful in our society than this, and I'm so sad that these parties can't get themselves together to fix it. So I'm putting that against the sunshine and the vigor, the beauty of London, and this lovely theatre, and you, right? I mean, I think there's something very cheery about the fact that 2,500 people on a Monday evening, when you could be having a beer by the river, want to come in and talk about politics. It's a very, very unusual. I'm not sure this would be true in most countries. There's so much that's extraordinary and wonderful about Britain, but there are also some deeply shameful things that we need to fix.
So walking. Walking is something for which you're very well known. You walked across Afghanistan and so on, and your hashtag Rory Walks for your promotion of your campaign. And when you became MP for Penrith, you walked around through snowdrifts and camped out in barns and all kinds of things. And there's a question from Harry, who is at Munro Pilgrim. He has recently set up a social media account to inspire young people to hike in Scotland. What lessons have you learned from your amazing walks? So basically, walking.
Okay.
What are the advantages of it?
Okay.
What's that all about?
Lessons on walking. Number one, if you're walking long distances, if you're doing, I did a walk that was almost 21 months long. So I walked 25, 30 miles a day across Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal. I stayed in 550 houses along the way. And I got an amazing tip from a guy called Nicholas Crane, who'd walked across the Pyrenees. He heard I was doing the walk. He invited me round to his house. He said, bring your backpack with you. And he tipped out my whole backpack on the ground. And he threw away my tent, my stove. He cut my toothbrush in half. He explained to me that I didn't need 2 pairs of socks. I only needed 3 socks. I could move my left sock onto my right sock, wash my right sock. And he took away my torch. He said, you've got the rest of your life to read. Don't want the extra weight of a head torch to read at night. And he was so right. I mean, every day that I put that pack on my back, I was grateful to Nicholas Crane for saving every single pound in that pack. The one thing he was wrong about was socks. So my one tip to Munro Walker, I know this tip is supposed to be a mystical story about the transforming, life-enhancing experience of being out in nature, and all that's true. All that's true. You never will feel as healthy, as mystically enhanced as you will when striding over the Scottish hills. But my advice is long distance is 2 pairs of socks, thin socks inside, thick socks outside. You won't get blisters.
I mean, the whole idea that rather than go through the hassle of washing your socks, you can just change left to right and vice versa. I mean, this is the kind of policies that are going to sweep you to power imminently, Rory. But I think enough of politics. Let's get on to some more, into the last 5 minutes now, some more personal questions. And Jimmy R. asks a question that we all want to know. Hi, Rory. What is your favourite meal?
Well, it's embarrassing. I'm accused by Shoshana, my wife, of not liking food enough. And I think that's because I'm completely obsessed with porridge. I eat porridge at least once a day, but sometimes twice a day. So I think there's just no doubt at all. My favorite food is porridge, and I'm very happy to bore people with my porridge recipes.
Okay, now you're losing them. Anonymous, what historical figures do you most admire, and what qualities of theirs do you find the most admirable? Let's stick to your top 3 historical figures you admire.
Simone Weil, for extraordinary ability to turn away from the temptations of the modern world, to embrace the most extraordinary personal sacrifices. So, Simone Weil, she was, I think, a sort of almost a modern saint. In a very different way, a very complicated, very controversial figure, I remain fascinated by Lawrence of Arabia. I think he was a man who worked himself very hard. There was a degree of self-challenge, was extraordinary. He chose to spend 14 years humiliating himself as a private soldier in the Air Force, handing out blankets in a quartermaster's store to try to pay penance for what he'd done in his earlier life. And I remain so full of admiration for what he was able to do physically, for the capacity of his mind and his later life. And finally, William Gladstone. And what I love about Gladstone is he started life as the most extraordinary right-wing Tory. And he ended life as this amazing left-wing liberal, pushing for home rule in Ireland. He's a man who reminds me of a great interview with Samuel Beckett, who's interviewed when he's in his 80s. And the interviewer says to him, it's in France, says to him, Mr. Beckett, do you not regret the vigor of your youth? And Beckett says, not with the fire that's in me now.
Well, Rory, I can't see why you would identify with those people in any way. So this is the very last question. And really, it's the most important question of all.
It's going to be about hedgehogs, isn't it?
No, it's not. It's
Benny
about
Hill?
your book, Rory. because that's what this is about, selling your book, which is absolutely wonderful. And I completely commend to one and all. And it's from Sonia and Christina. And they ask, what do you hope people will take away and learn from your book? Buy your other books, I assume.
No, thank you very much. Well, what I hope that you take away is not that I think I'm somehow better than other politicians. I hope there's enough in the book where I'm honest enough about how embarrassing I was, how many mistakes I made, how I was equally bad. But I also hope you take away a sense that it shouldn't be a depressing book. It shouldn't be a negative book. I am very, very critical. I think that things are a real mess. But the reason I'm doing that is that I feel things could be much, much better. And I feel the only way to make things better is to acknowledge the depth of the mess we're in. If we deny how bad politics has begun, we're never going to get the kind of solutions we need to create a world which is worthy of us. So I don't have the answers, but I hope by making you, in a small way, focus on the depth of the problem, you will begin to work with me and with many other people in trying to work out what those answers could be. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.